Just as I thought I had discovered the means to create a better world for those around me, it is taken away. 15 years of searching. 15 years of trying to find a conclusion to something that had no definite answer. 15 years of feeling like my life had served some sort of purpose to the world around me. 15 years wasted by a dream. The dream was lost today. It was lost only a few minutes ago when Park informed me that the department was being shut down. He told it to me in such a harsh manner. We no longer wish to fund your department. Gather your things and leave. After 5 minutes of throwing a tantrum and wishing his company to run itself into the ground without me, I took my leave. We were making strides in the world. People were benefiting from my project. Just last week, I had received a letter from a woman in Taiwan. Her father had been impaled by a falling roof and had to amputate his left leg and his middle finger, index finger, and thumb removed from his right hand. He was 63 years old. He's now bedridden, and a representative of ours, Mine Lewis, worked as my employee, made contact with the family to test out the product. After 8 months, he showed remarkable improvement. He was able to walk about, albeit with a slight limp, and can carry up to 150 pounds. His hands were also doing very nicely, and he has been improving his cognitive skills along with his writing. She thanked us profusely for helping her father. If Park only knew the kinds of people this could help, he would change his mind about his decision. Sure, he wants to throw all his money at stem cell research and cancer prevention, but his real attention should be geared towards my work. Of course, he once did have faith in me, but that was years ago. I suppose it started to all go downhill in 2013. That was when we released the first generation out into the public for trials. Everything was great. All patients improved on their various disabilities. Some even claimed they improved past the point they were at pre-illness or pre-accident. It was Park, that slimy bastard, who decided we needed more time. It was Park who called for us to stop being so zealous over our discovery. I never knew what had gotten into him. Leaving the office with a box stuffed with papers and pens almost felt liberating, however. As soon as I took in the fresh air, it dawned on me that maybe this was a sign that I shouldn't have relied on Park to begin with. All that time and research was from my efforts, not his, so I surely can proceed on my own. Everything would have to be run from my apartment. I couldn't risk joining a new company, working my way back up, and risk denial of my work. I could call a few people, pull a few strings, maybe call Lewis and see if he'll do some more advertising for me. First, to the pet store. I'm sure I can find some things there that I'll need. Then the general market, and maybe to a cafe and get some tea for the evening. I can call Naomi in the morning and see what she can do for me. I've got everything set up in my apartment. Victor came by last night after he heard the news and brought everything else I needed. He'll be staying here and helping me with my research from here on out. Naomi stopped by as well just an hour ago. She said she would have to think about it, but I'm sure she'll come around. My trip to the pet store was great. I was able to get everything I needed to get started and more for any worst-case scenarios. Victor has started on the filtering process now. It should be a few more days of incubation before we can continue the process. Everything is looking great so far. Shove it, Park. Naomi came by again. The three of us sat down and had a long discussion. She's in. Incubation is complete. Victor and I separated the pods, and I have started on the alchemical portion of the experiment. I had to send Victor down to the apothecary and then to the garden shop to see if he could find lichen of any kind. I may have to send him camping if he comes back empty-handed. We have 2 pods for testing. One focuses on adipogenic differentiation cells multiplying into other cells. The other is a combined source of proteins and plant fibers with resilient properties, thus the need for lichen. Eventually, as the 2 pods improve, we should be able to combine them and continue on to the next step. Victor was able to find the lichen. He found a decent specimen, a folio sample in particular. Good. He has his doubts. He called during his camping trip and had concerns over the sulfur dioxide components of the plant. I told him I would take care of it, to just gather the samples and hurry back. Pod 1 is showing great results. Pod 2 should start improving once the lichen is broken down, mixed, and injected into the seed. Wow, overnight, Pod 2 changed immensely. No sulfur dioxide was detected from the lichen, so it seems my efforts paid off. The surface acts like mercury, it rejects anything less dense than itself. A little worrying, but it is exactly what we need to continue. Victor and I will commence mixture of the two pods. I called Naomi and told her we would need her help in a couple of days. I hope she pulls through. Some men showed up asking about our work. Victor showed them to the door. I still can't believe how quickly this project has come together. Mixing the pods worked out exactly the way we had anticipated. It is definitely hard, doing this work without the proper lab equipment, but I'm thankful it worked. The new pod is ready to go for vial testing. I have more faith in this project than I do in any other modern medicine. Perhaps maybe even more than I would have in God, if I believed in him. This would negate the need for such a being anyhow. Naomi came over, just as she had promised. After a few stinging remarks on my disheveled hair and baggy eyes, I directed her attention to the project. I had loaded a small dose, about 5 ml in total, and walked her through the process. This should be enough. Give it 2 days, come back, and we will discuss what you want to do next. If you wish to back out, I understand. She agreed, and Victor put her under anesthesia. I had a little trouble with the bow saw once I hit bone, but luckily I was able to saw through before she woke. We let her rest, gave her some painkillers when she woke up, and injected the cure. For now, we are calling it Reg 5. I know I told Naomi not to call yet, but I'm getting anxious. She didn't arrive until the end of the day. And wow, Reg 5 is working much quicker than we could have hoped for. Already, we see that the wound had completely healed and was starting to bulge. We took her out for a meal to celebrate, and I could have sworn I saw those men from just a few days ago watching us. Victor told me I was being paranoid. I agreed, so we spent the rest of the night drinking and reveling in our success. Saw Naomi again today. What she showed the two of us was surely revolutionary. We had just sawn off her calf just below the knee on the 25th. It is the 29th, 4 days later, and she already has baby toes sprouting from a completely normal-looking foot. Reg 5 seems to be much more promising than we originally anticipated. We may be able to start mass producing soon if we take this to a big company. Or perhaps we should go an underground route and take it to Asia and South America. Of course, I'm getting ahead of myself. We must take note of any side effects this may have. Last day of April. Naomi and I went out to get tea and breakfast this morning. I hope she didn't realize I only wished to observe. The lass was acting as if this was a social, possibly romantic outing. While I admit she's a fine woman, I have a career on the line. I can't distract myself now, not when I'm so close. However, she seems to be fine. Her eyes seem to radiate with a healthy glow, and she holds a much brighter expression than she ever has in the past 18 months of knowing her. Side effects, if any, seem to be benign and of no significance. Victor made me run home today. At first, I thought he was freaking out over nothing. Didn't help that he wouldn't tell me the issue. Of course, I can see what he is talking about now. Naomi was waiting there with him when I arrived. As soon as she looked up from her mug, I could see the side effects taking shape. Her iris and pupil had grown in diameter, almost blocking out the sclera entirely. Her iris was a hazy deep purple, a very unusual change from her previously brown eyes. However, everything else was normal. No other changes. The change in her eyes seemed to be cosmetic only. I do not believe this will be of any consequence to us. Victor refuses to release the first batch of Reg 5 to the public. Fine. I can do without him. I called Luis. Luckily, the man is doing some work down in Chile this summer. I told him I would be sending him 100 vials of the Reg 5 to distribute to anyone he finds needing it. I promised another batch to follow in a month, and to contact me when he moves so I can send the next packages accordingly. We have a deal. It may not be the most legal way of going about this, but I can't risk exposing myself here. The men came again today. Since Victor moved out last night, he wasn't here to tell them to shove off for me. Surprisingly, though it was an insightful visit. They are actually very interested in helping me move Reg 5 to the public and have agreed to some seedier terms. Soon the cure will be all over Southern and Eastern Asia, helping them in ways they couldn't have dreamed of. Naomi came by again today for some physical therapy. The leg is working just fine. Overall, Her reflexes have improved immensely. She said she was thinking of taking up sports. It'd be a grand idea, especially with the improvements she's made with the treatment. We also tested her eyes some more, as they have not changed since her previous visit. Remarkably, she can see everything. She has hyper-awareness of her surroundings. Her vision is obscured. What she describes is almost like the way a bat navigates through echolocation. It's tricky to describe, but there is no harm in this discovery either. She seems happy with the change, and so am I. I saw Victor at the general store today. He didn't speak to me. Fuck. Oh God. A motorist ran me over as I was crossing the walk today downtown. Fuck. Now I'm in the hospital, no way to contact anyone. I have a collapsed lung, 2 broken legs, a crushed hand, and a concussion to top it all off. For Christ's sake, I can't afford any of this. Somehow, Naomi caught wind of my accident. She visited me in the hospital today, thank God for her. I lent her my key and told her to bring me 5 vials of the Reg 5. Naomi was able to bring me the cure and helped me inject each dose. It'll be a painful few days of recovery, but I feel better knowing my own treatment will heal me rather than this shoddy, rich man's modern medicine that these quacks are trying to offer me. Finally released from the hospital today. It was quite funny seeing the doctors struggle to figure out how my body was fixing itself so quickly. Every time a bone snapped back into place or a scar disappeared with no visual confirmation of trauma in front of that doctor, I burst out laughing at his failure as a healer. He has no right to compare himself to me. I found out today that I really don't like tea. I don't quite care for any vegetable, honestly. Naomi called. We went out for dinner. Honestly, I take back what I said before. She is obviously into me on a romantic and sexual level. I don't know why I denied my feelings towards her. She's a lovely woman. Looked in the mirror and my eyes have made the same change as Naomi's did. I feel wonderful, strong. I'm aware of everything around me. My reflexes haven't been this great since my 20s. I almost dropped a cup today and saved it with my own reflexes. Outstanding. However, I did feel odd today. I went out and bought a humidifier, which helped tremendously. I've been bumping up the heat in the apartment as well. My skin is starting to make its own mucus. I haven't cared to look in the mirror since yesterday. I'm afraid to do so. After I started exuding mucus, I noticed certain details of my body had become formless, or at least less detailed. I've lost all my fingerprints. From feeling them, it seems that my ears have started to shrink, and I've lost certain folds in the auricle. I seem to still have facial hair, but my scalp has been rejecting all of my hair, as well as my underarms, which haven't been this bald since I was 11. I'm not the hairiest man to begin with, but I can tell I have lost quite a bit of body hair as well. I'm starting to become sensitive to light. How could this be? I took 5 injections of the Reg 5. I'm afraid the side effects will start becoming worse and worse over time. I must talk to Naomi. Naomi and I talked. She didn't want to look at me. I must really be hideous. She suggested we cease meeting in public. However, I did get something positive from our meeting. She has not appeared to have changed at all, mind the eyes, so it seems the level of transformation is caused by the quantity of dose. I can't stand the light. I can see much better in the darkness. The texture of my skin has changed a bit. I no longer produce as much mucus, but without it, my skin feels flaky and hot. I'm drinking much more water. I'm also eating a lot more meat. Chicken finally settles with no outbreaks. Seems as though I've kicked my poultry allergy. Naomi came over, but only for a minute. She screamed as soon as she saw my face. I don't understand why. She tried running back out the door, but I tried catching her arm as she did. She told me to let go. Something came over me, like an instinct, I suppose is how I would classify it. As soon as she tried forcing herself away, I tackled the poor girl. I stared into those amphibious eyes and plunged my thumbs into them. The way the tissue felt under the pressure of my thumbs, it was euphoric. It felt like I was fighting for survival, and I was winning. I haven't moved Naomi's body out of the apartment. It feels nice having her around. I'm not sure if it's because I miss her company as a person, or if it's because I'm craving a meal. I started packaging pieces of her to save. I don't want any of the meat to spoil, nor do I want to draw any attention towards my apartment with the smell. Luckily, the duplex is somewhat secluded, and the landlord has yet to find a tenant for the apartment above. I finally looked in the mirror today as well. I must say I enjoy the look. I hadn't even realized my sense of smell had started to deteriorate, but I had to see if it was a sense I'd lost once I saw my nose had sunk into my face. I have no eyebrows nor facial hair. All of my hair is gone, honestly. My ears are now simply holes, though a flap of tissue hangs from them, likely what is left of my earlobes. My teeth are fine. No changes. I've also noticed a few flaps of skin on my neck and collarbones, but I have yet to find a purpose for them. I'm definitely looking gaunt though. Maybe I'll have Naomi for dinner tonight. Those men stopped by today. They didn't seem to harbor any feelings towards my appearance. If anything, they were impressed. I'm impressed as well. It's good someone finally has faith in my work, Lewis called me. He had made a number of injections of Reg 5 into a teenage girl who was suffering from a lung disease as well as a flesh-eating virus. While she has gotten over her ailments, he couldn't help but worry over the seemingly amphibious traits she and other patients as well had acquired after the treatment. He didn't want to continue with this work. I told him to shove off. I ordered a small inflatable pool a couple days ago, and it's finally arrived. Thank God for 2-day shipping. As soon as I got it set up and filled, I took a small soak. I've never felt more at home. Filled the pool a little higher than I had it yesterday. I made a discovery while studying my process of evolution in the mirror. I believe those flaps may actually be gills. Acquisition of gills is confirmed. I can breathe underwater. The men came back today. I told them I no longer had contact with my overseas advertising team and was willing to sell what I had meant to ship to them. I made 8.5 million today. There is nothing more of Naomi to consume. I called Victor. I said we got off on the wrong foot and I wished to make amends. I killed Victor when he arrived. I've already got him packaged and ready for further consumption. Park came by. I decided to hide my appearance from him. I claimed I had fallen ill, but still wished to speak about how things ended. Turns out, his company hasn't been doing so great after my leave. Of course, he is still fighting the government on his stem cell research. The strides made towards lung and breast cancer had made slight gains, but nothing more. I decided to tell him about my hit and run incident. At first, he was alarmed, and then naturally asked how I had healed so quickly. I took my chance to rant for a small minute about the regenerative properties of axolotls and various lizards, as well as the unnatural resilience of lichen in extreme environments. I proceeded to remove my headwear, scarf, sunglasses, and surgical mask. I loved the terror in his eyes when I did so. I leapt over the table and gouged his eyes out. It's not humid enough in here. It seems the higher the humidity, the more mucus I produce. Taking regular long soaks in the pool helps as well, and it prevents my skin from feeling so irritated. I no longer sleep. I no longer dream. The heat is high, and the water is warm. The stench draws me in. Cillian, it's time, you need to wake up. Soft rays of light were rising through the dust swirling through the air. The room was dimly lit by firelight already, and at this time the boys were blowing them out, getting prepared for the long day. Above Cillian stood a boy, 2 years his senior, named Thomas. Cillian, you need to get up. Edmund will be here in 10 minutes. He'll be sore of sorts if he sees you lying around. The dark-haired boy shook Cillian by the shoulder. He moaned, pushed Thomas' hands away, and sat up in his cot. 6 other boys were just now rising for work. On the far end of the room were Jacob, Leo, and Henry, golden-haired brothers of ages 5, 7, and 8, respectively. Uriah and Nick, the oldest of the group, both 9, were putting out the candles together, as everything they did was so. Finally, there was Landon, a 6-year-old who had started at the same time as Cillian himself. Landon was tying up his shoes, sitting alone. Cillian proceeded to change once Thomas rose from his spot. First, the pants, the brown shirt. Finally, the overalls all covered in soot. The other boys were just as dirty. Black and grey faces sleeping on black and grey sacks, shielding themselves from the cold basement air with burlap. Are we all ready? Cillian asked as he finished tying his right shoelace. The boys all murmured in agreement, and it became silent as they sat waiting. They were not allowed upstairs without Edmund's permission. Of course, the brothers started whispering between themselves, likely about Earl's disappearance the week before. The group was once 15, but over time, boys had supposedly disappeared. Cillian knew the rumors were false. Each of them would take the opportunity to escape if they happened upon the chance. Early rising, boys. A deep voice boomed with the loud stomps of feet against stone. The iron door slammed open, revealing a tall, thin man in the doorway. He flashed his teeth, green eyes scanning the room. All ready to get cleaning. "Yes, Master Edmund," the boys sang in unison. Edmund ushered them upstairs, and like sheep, they followed. Edmund stood at the top of the stairwell, handing each boy a piece of bread when they reached the top. Each child took a large bite, scarfing down their first meal of the day. A glass of water was given to each as well, which was also depleted as soon as they were given. After they ate and drank, they gathered around Edmund, waiting for their orders of the day. Edmund sported a parchment in his hand and read aloud to the group. 2 other men stood beside him. "Today, Leo, Henry, and Jake. You 3 will be helping Philip today on the 500 block east. Uriah and Nick will be going with Joe on the 1400 block south." Edmund continued reading, each of the 2 men nodding when their names were read aloud. "Landon, Thomas, and Cillian. You 3 will be coming with me on the 2500 block north." Edmund tossed the parchment aside and brushed his hand into Landon's hair, who ducked instinctively at the contact. The superior belted out a laugh, as did the other 2 men, and they grabbed their respective teams by their collars to push them along. This would be the 5th week working with Edmund for Cillian. It would also be his 5th week working. The nice thing about splitting into teams is that alone time was very possible. Usually, like today, Master Edmund would take the boys to the block they were meant to work, followed by Edmund getting drunk off of a Scottish drink and flirting with dames walking by as the boys hopped from roof to roof. Cillian noticed right away that they were working a richer part of London today, and that usually meant that the boys would be making Edmund more money, and the clients would always be picky about their work. However, the older widows were typically very kind to them, often offering tea or fruits for their labor. Once reaching the first house of the day, Edmund chatted with the owner, and the 3 young boys were allowed access to the rooftop. Thomas and Landon carried the sweeps as Cillian guided them through the house, using the master key to open the rooftop hatch. He was the first to climb up, so he was the one pulling the tools up onto the roof and helping the other 2 onto the roof. Work was hard, of course. Thomas, the oldest, ironically, was the smallest, so it was up to him to climb down the chimney. Landon and Cillian were meant to sit, hand tools, and help get him unstuck if Thomas were to get in a sticky spot. "Can I ask you something?" Cillian looked over towards Landon, who was looking down at his shoes, hands cupped together. "Maybe." "What is it?" he asked, staring at the other boy. Landon was hesitating. "Oh, all of us, all the others, doomed." "Don't talk like that." "Why not? Are we?" Landon barked at him, now leaning forward in interest. Cillian had never heard the boy speak more than a few words, so the conversation was certainly a surprise. "Look, things happen. We're never going to have a good life. But complaining about it won't do anything. The rich die the same way we do, so it doesn't matter. But we're kids. And the rich are babies," Cillian retorted, causing the boy to look back down at his feet. "Is this about Earl? He's gone. He probably ran off and isn't doing any better than he was before." Landon huffed, turning his head to the east. The 2 fell silent, one upset at his state of being, the other content in his misery. Though they were the same age, Cillian found himself hating the way Landon thought. "What happened? I was enjoying the commentary," Thomas shouted from inside the chimney, his voice echoing in the slightest. "I need a smaller brush." Cillian stood up, grabbed one of the smaller brushes, and leaned over the opening into the flue. Thomas was wedged down inside, already covered in a generous layer of soot. He pushed himself up a few inches, grabbing the end of the brush, nodded in thanks, and shimmied his way back down the chute. After cleaning the chimney, they gathered the soot into sacks, presented them to the homeowner, and continued on to the next house. The cycle continued all day, and Edmund deserted them sometime around noon while the boys started to have lunch. They sat down on a bench in the park and pulled out small bags with apples and bread. Typically, the only good they would be given for lunch would be the leftover bread from the morning, but they were lucky enough to clean a sweet old woman's chimney who gifted them with apples for their hard work. "What was life like for you before?" Landon inquired, while the three were halfway done with their measly meal. Cillian and Thomas both looked at each other, wondering which one the boy was referring to. "Well, I came to work on my own," Thomas explained as he took a bite into his bread. "I lost my parents around 5 years ago. My sister and I stayed with our uncle until he passed away a couple of years ago." Landon stared at the boy and rested a hand on his shoulder. They all knew the devastation losing family brought. "Where is your sister now?" "Oh, she lives with my aunt. She's an old crone and doesn't make much money by herself, so I had to step up, you dig." "Right. What about you, Cillian?" Landon turned his gaze to the red-headed lad, who was very surprised by the interest. Life was okay," the boy sighed, staring down at his bread. "Not much to tell, really." "Oh, come on. It couldn't have been any worse than now." "Well, I lost all my family in the famine." The two boys looked at each other, puzzled at first, and the fact dawned on Thomas first. "Of course, I forget you're Irish sometimes." "Thank you." Cillian's reply was truly thankful. It was hard being Irish at this time. Sweeping helped keep himself under the radar, as long as he didn't speak any Gaelic. Of course, he saw his parents passing almost as a blessing. The harassment of being an Irish family in Northern Ireland would have taken a toll on the happy family. "What about you, Landon?" Cillian raised an eyebrow at him. "What are your roots?" "I don't know." He spoke. "I only remember the orphanage until Joe picked me up." The sweepers took a few minutes chatting with each other before heading to their next house. This block allowed the boys to split up and each work a house at a time. These older homes were much easier to clean, so there wasn't much need for 2 extra workers standing around. They split off with Landon taking the first house across the street and Cillian taking the house beside the one Thomas would be working. Cillian preferred working these homes. While they often didn't get food or gifts from these families, they were much kinder overall and lived a very humble lifestyle. The street was clad in red brick and white moldings, many of the windows in a circular shape bearing the cross. "Sweeper!" the boy shouted as he banged the hook upon the cedar door. Only moments passed until an older fellow opened the door and ushered him inside. The interior of the house was quaint red hardwood, white china cabinets, and floral print couches. A fairly typical setup, to say the least. The man led Cillian to his roof and thanked him before climbing up onto the roof. Cillian laid down the brushes he had brought with him. He tried to judge which one would be appropriate, leaning the ones he figured he may need later against the chimney. It was then that he decided to peer inside for a better take on which tool to utilize. Inside the chimney, like most chimneys, it was completely black with ash and soot. As he inspected the interior more thoroughly, he spotted a blockage within the chute, as if a log had been dropped inside and caught at a strange angle between layers of bricks. Grabbing the longest nearby brush, he plunged it inside to try and clear the blockage. Strange, he thought, maybe if I just keep chipping at it, it'll fall through. The more he prodded at the blockage, the denser it seemed to become. It was getting more and more aggravating by the minute. Finally, after prodding at the blockage for a few more minutes, he gave up, leaning against the wall of bricks that formed the chimney he was trying to clear. He figured a few seconds of rest might give him enough energy to forcefully break the clump of soot that lay below him. Taking the small break allowed him to finally notice his surroundings more clearly. As is typical in London, the sky was bleak. A sheet of grey clouds loomed over the city, obscuring the sun yet still allowing the light to peek through, albeit in the form of a soft glow. It was now that Cillian realized how the clouds resembled smoke that bogs from the chimneys scattering the city. It was one more thing that reminded him of the life he currently led. A pop brought him back to reality as he sat there. It mirrored the sound of the cracking of an open fire. Is that old fool really starting a fire while I'm trying to clean? Cillian asked himself. If so, he would be very upset at the fact, as the build-up of soot would only keep growing, thus making his job even more difficult than it already was. Nonetheless, The noise grew as he pulled himself to his feet. The stench of smoke reached his nose in an unsettling manner. It smelled as if something was being cooked or burned, and it surely wasn't mouth-watering in the least. Before he could turn around, he could feel the heat radiating on his back, and then he felt a hand on his shoulder. The hand, black and soft, was made of soot. Cillian felt himself shaking. He didn't want to turn around. He didn't want to face whatever was behind him. Sigh. Lie. A large gasp was emitted. An alien. He could not stop trembling, however. He did find the courage within himself to at least take a glance at whatever held his shoulder. He closed his eyes first and slowly turned his head 90 degrees. Its body was pitch black. Standing well over 10 feet, its arms were just as long as its torso, if not shorter. Cillian had yet to see if the thing had legs. Its entire body seemed to be a mold of ash, red embers flushing between cracks of soot. Cillian recognized the face almost immediately. Earl, Lion. The voice, slow and immature, broke out from its lipless mouth. Though it appeared to have a multitude of eyes, one set glowed a bright orange with an expression that seemed more somber than aggravated. Cillian clasped his mouth shut with his free hand, his own pair of eyes watering. He could not tell if it was due to emotion or the amount of soot entering his eyes. Perhaps it was both. Cillian. The red-headed boy turned to his right. On the other rooftop was Thomas, his head, arms, and torso peeking out from the adjacent chimney of the other house. Something was pulling him in. Thomas was screaming like a child. Before any reaction could be made, the hand of what was once the Saxon boy Earl wrapped around Cillian's arm, its grip tight and firm despite what the creature seemed to be made of. With little effort, Cillian fell back with a hand into the air. The sootman retreated back into its chimney, attempting to pull Cillian in with him. With quick thinking, Cillian grabbed the edges of the opening and used his legs to anchor himself to the outside of the chute. The sootman only pulled harder against him, cutting his palms on the rough texture of the brick. He could still hear Thomas screaming in the near distance, and then silence. Sigh. Lie. The sootman was easily aggravated by his efforts. A loud hiss emitted from it below, as if to resemble oil sizzling on an iron pan. Both arms now reached around his torso for a better grip on him, and the touch of its arms slowly started to burn the layers of clothes he wore. The searing heat caused Cillian to wince and scream out in pain. Fighting tooth and nail to keep his grip on the chimney, he hoped one of the residents nearby would hear the commotion. Finally, things started to turn in Cillian's favor. Busting through the door was Landon, sprinting over and grabbing Cillian's legs. It was now a tug-of-war between Landon and the sootman, with Cillian caught in the middle. Cillian reached his hand out for Landon, the scorching heat radiating from the sootman burning his own flesh now. The smell was revolting, and Cillian held back his vomit as Landon took his hand and pulled. The tension broke instantaneously, and Cillian toppled on top of his savior. Both boys grunted as they met the ground, soot flying everywhere, coating the two in the substance. A soft whine echoed from the chimney and ceased within seconds. Cillian wrapped himself up into a fetal position, trembling. His abdomen was in so much pain, and the mental scars kept him in a state of shock. Landon, however, took only a small breath before peering back into the chimney. The sootman was gone, now diminished into a pile of ash falling towards the hearth. "Let's go," Landon whispered, carefully lifting Cillian to his feet. Cillian clutched his abdomen to seemingly hide his pain, and before being led to the stairwell, a voice whispered into his ear, "From ashes we rise, and to ashes we fall." It didn't make itself known until I was a teenager. Before it made its presence, my life was already in the gutters. I was born in a small Nevada town, raised by my mother, a woman of high convictions and even higher standards. My father died in a motorcycle crash in '84 when I was only 2. Despite our relationship, I tried to give my mother the benefit of the doubt. I knew she had always grieved for him. I suppose I reminded her too much about him, with the ways she chose to ignore and belittle me. It was too hard for her to look at my face and only see him. I had to seek out the information on my own. My mother had taken down all his pictures, blacked out his face from our photo albums, and no longer spoke to his side of the family. I stumbled upon an old newspaper in our cellar when I was a little bit older, yellowed from the humidity and age, almost breaking apart in my hands. I admit, we do look similar. Square face, hooded eyes, curled hair, and the signature hawk nose. I had never known how big his smile was until then. I made the decision to cut out his picture and obituary from the paper, hiding it in a book I never touched until then. At night, I would pull the book off my shelf and read his description. Miguel Villela, 32, was found dead 6 miles outside of Carson City. His motorcycle was seen to have suffered damage from a collision, the perpetrator still not apprehended by local police. Miguel was a mechanic in Fairfield, succeeded by his wife, Tamara Wiss, 31, and daughter, Paula Villela Wiss, 2. The Villela family expresses their remorse for his passing. He was highly respected within his community, a charitable and inviting man who loved engines and his daughter. His funeral will be held on the 7th. It only took a few weeks for my mother to find the clipping and tear it to shreds before my eyes. I didn't deserve to know my father. Depression started to set in a few years before it appeared. Though I now knew my father was a well-liked man, many people avoided my gaze. I was lonely, angry, and at most naive. I had become desensitized to my mother's qualms and slowly becoming tolerant of others, though they were my main source of self-esteem, even though I was rarely satisfied. Over time, I started hating my father. How dare he hurt my mother in such a permanent frame of mind? How dare he leave me alone with her? How dare he cause the population to look down, pity, and hate us? How dare he? I was at my lowest when it appeared. It's not easy to describe. It isn't necessarily corporeal, neither is it a simple feeling or ambience. Sometimes it appears before me as a shadow when there is nothing but light. Other times I can feel it wrap around me and comfort me, however the source is not seen. Most of the time it chooses to appear to me as a soft glow, like backscatter. When I become aware of it, it hums to me as if it is listening to a song unbeknownst to me, however its meaning is always clear. I do not know its language, but I always understand. It often comes to me in times of distress. When I sit on my bedside wallowing in my own self-pity, when I leave an unpleasant encounter, or when I am emotionally idle, it always comes to me. I find it to be the only real thing, the only comforting thing in this world. It's not like it feeds off my negativity. I would not call it demon nor angel. Perhaps it is a vice or an otherworldly projection. However, it is most likely something I have created myself to feel less alone. My growth was only known to it. A month before my 20th birthday, my mother died. I had moved out long before then, but as her only family, I was the one to return to my childhood home and clean up the mess she left. Clutter is a very nice way of saying what she left for me. I suppose it was her last, fuck you. Most it was garbage, easy enough to deal with, though personal items were scattered evenly throughout the house. It wasn't long for me to notice most of it belonged to me, or was mine at one point in time. Old baby clothes, pacifiers, a few cheap toys. Most of it was in poor enough condition that I could just toss it. Moving into my mother's room was when it decided to appear to me again. It suggested I lift the mattress, and I obliged. I wasn't told or knew what to expect with this order. I can't say I wasn't surprised with what I found. An old folder sat between the bed frame and mattress, in fairly good condition too, likely from the lack of use. I took a seat on the floor as I curiously peeked at its contents. The first page was simply a list of purchases, receipts clipped to it, a majority being tools and various automobile parts I didn't know of. Behind it was my mother's will. I glanced over it, the only thing mentioned being her burial wishes. Setting it aside revealed a plethora of old pictures. I recognized most, obvious copies of the ones once in our family photo album, yet untouched and wasn't vandalized whatsoever. Every photo contained my father. Though I had not forgotten his face due to our resemblance and the small memory of his obituary, I felt as if I was seeing his face for the first time. His smile was genuine in each one. A few contained images of his family, faces I never knew of. It was then I realized his mum was the bearer of the traits we shared, a fact I never knew, though our eyebrows were most definitely from his father. I found an uncle and an aunt in there as well. They looked kind. My father's brother seemed to share many of his personality traits, apparent in images of their teenage years leaned over a car, covered in oil and grime, each posing a thumbs up of a job well done. Sifting through led me to a family photo of the three of us. It was perhaps the first time I saw my mother happy, wrapped in his arms, an infant coddled beside their faces, and an unrecognizable display of teeth and happiness I had never experienced from her. I felt the presence of my companion envelope me in warmth. I was feeling true sadness at this time. I wept, and it brushed my tears away. By the time I had finished crying, I took another look through the folder. At the very bottom, behind the mass of photos, was a filled form and a blue key. Supposedly, it led to a storage unit at the edge of town, signed off to my father. I had no memory of it, never being there to store or pick up items it contained. My curiosity piqued enough to take a look at a later time. A week later, after talking with a mortician and dealing with legalities, my mother's funeral came and went. I was the only one who attended alongside the priest. As per her wishes, she was placed beside my father beneath a large cross tombstone. The priest spoke of forgiveness and the tragedy of losing love so young. Though I had always known the pain my mother dealt with, it was perhaps the first time I truly felt empathy and remorse towards her. I could feel it behind me, and I could only assume it was weeping. I took the rest of the day after the burial to investigate the storage unit left behind by my father, key in hand. It wasn't too difficult to find, labeled 1306 in large bold text that matched with the key, only a few rows down. I saw it appear as light before me, ushering me to open the garage, almost impatient with its demeanor. The garage door screeched as I lifted it above my head and pushed it forward. For a moment, all I could see was dust billowing into the air. I coughed and waved my hand through the dust, shielding my eyes until it settled. Everything was covered in sheets, stacks of what I only assumed was boxes, and some large unidentifiable mass taking up the center of the unit. I could feel it out pressure on my back to guide me, humming a tune in my ear, telling me to uncover the item that sat in the center. It was a motorcycle. It was my father's motorcycle. It was severely damaged, the body dented, the spokes on the front tire twisted, handlebars almost falling apart. A toolbox sat on the black leather seat, yellowed tape labeling it with my father's name. Instant guilt fell upon me. My new instructions were to restore it. In all of my free time for the next month, I wrenched away at it, returning to the garage in the evenings as soon as I finished work. Though I had never done any mechanical work in my life, fixing it became easy. I knew which parts to order and how to install them. Many nights were spent slouched over the toolbox as I fell asleep fixing the bike. It never made an appearance during this time, leaving me to my own devices. I never seemed to struggle, despite my lack of experience, and it was as good as new by the end of the month. The day I had completed my work was the day it returned, humming a song into my head, inviting me to enjoy my hard work and take it for a spin and feel free for the rest of the day. Donning an undamaged helmet left behind, I mounted myself onto the motorcycle, taking a deep inhale before embarking on whatever journey I might find myself on. This was my gift to you. I'm sorry I could never give it to you in person. This was the first time I heard its voice. It seemed familiar. I found myself trembling on the motorcycle, waves of emotions hitting me as if I were the shore. "Where are you?" I whispered, observing the area around me. I could not see it, and it did not reply. Instinctively, I started to ride towards Carson City. It was a bit far to ride while not having a license, but I found myself not caring as soon as the wind began to dance with my hair. 6 miles outside of Carson City, I found something by the side of the road. An elegy decorated with fresh flowers, a cross, and a broken helmet. I stopped here, a hunch telling me to kneel beside it. I lifted myself from the motorcycle and knelt, as planned, picking up the helmet. The visor was irreparable, smashed in and scratched from impact. A crevice lined the right side of the black Kevlar. I felt my eyes start to water as I set it back down and looked up at the picture nailed to the cross. I was in the right spot. This was where my father died. Paula, a soft, masculine voice echoed behind me. I jerked my head around at the calling of my name. I stared in awe, slowly rising to my feet at the sight. "I am so sorry, Mija." The tears did not wait to roll down my face. Miguel Villela had returned, ever so gruesome, but it was Miguel all the same. Though his face was bloodied, arm twisted, and legs broken and bruised, I recognized him as the loving man from the pictures. "I never meant to leave you. I never wanted you to grow up without me." "But I didn't," I choked. You were with me every step of the way, weren't you? I suppose I was. And did you visit Mom? He stood quietly for only a moment. No, but I tried. She had forgotten who I was. The pain in my chest grew. Why did you take me here? I needed you to see me one last time, when you were ready. I know the disdain you held for me. I needed you to forgive me. He took a step towards me. I understand. I'm sorry. I just wish I knew you. I took a step forward. I know, Mija. This is part of why I brought you here. We have a lot of catching up to do. He stretched his arms out and embraced me. Despite the fact he wasn't real, I could feel his mass, his warmth. I rested my head into his chest and cried. I did not hear the semi rolling up the hill. Either way, I don't think I would have cared if I had. My father and I have a lot of catching up to do.